This is a story that my dad shared with me. He grew up in a small suburb community of Stowe, Ohio, with his parents and older sister. Across the street lived a boy named Richard Wade Cooey. He was the same age as my dad and described him as a scrawny, red-headed troublemaker. He would spit on people as they walked by, and even set a house on fire in the neighborhood and blamed it on a kid who had special needs. Nothing he did as a child, however, could compare to the crime that he committed when he was only 19 years old. My dad had just started his sophomore year of college when he heard the news. Richard and his friends Clinton and Kenneth were throwing pieces of concrete off a local bridge onto the interstate when one of them struck the vehicle of 21-year-old Wendy Ofrendo. Her friend, 20-year-old Dawn McCreary, was also in the car. They were sorority sisters who had just gotten off work at a local restaurant. At this point, Kenneth decided he had enough and went home. This is when Richard and Clinton came up with their evil scheme. Both of the young men approached the girls, offering them help, and offered to give them a ride. They drove the girls to a shopping centre, where they told them to call their parents and let them know that they were alright. The two then forced the girls back into the car, tied their hands together and drove them to a field behind the local mall, where they raped, stabbed, and tortured them for 3 grueling hours. They abandoned their bodies in the field, but only after they carved large X's on their stomachs. Richard and Clinton then decided they wanted to sell the girls' clothing and jewellery to make some extra cash. When Richard couldn't find a buyer for the items, he burnt them in his backyard, which awoke my grandparents. My grandfather called the police to report what he thought was yet another neighbourhood disturbance from Richard. The police gathered the items for evidence, and after finding Wendy's abandoned car, they arrested Richard and began the investigation. Clinton and Richard were both arrested and charged with the murders. They had found a bloody pocket knife used to stab Wendy in the neck in Clinton's pocket when he was arrested, and some of the burnt items still had traces of the girl's blood. Since Clinton was only 17, he was spared the death sentence and currently is serving life in prison. Richard, however, was given the death penalty. On October 14, 2008 at 10 a.m, he was executed by lethal injection. Wendy's family was present at his execution. Every time I visit my grandparents and look across the street at that house, I can't help but get chills. Richard, I'm glad that we never met, and I'm certainly glad my dad was smart enough to not become your friend growing up. This story happened around 2008, and I don't remember everything. I was out of town when this situation went on. My friends Jessica and Aaron grew up in a small southern town. They, like so many who have this in common, tend to be kind of naive and gullible, because many of us grow up in safe areas where everyone knows us and relates to the most of the town, etc. Jessica and Aaron were high school sweethearts. They got together later in their 20s and married and had 3 children. They lived in the small house next door to Aaron's parents. Aaron worked for some type of construction job that worked out of town. He left early every Monday morning, was away from home all week, and came home on a Thursday night for a long weekend with his family. Jessica was a stay-at-home mom. One weekend, Aaron called and he had made friends with a guy named Mark. Mark was not from our area. I think he was from the northwest area of the US, but he had somehow ended up here in the south, married a lady who was from the nearest large city, which was 35 miles away. When Aaron met him, Mark and his wife were having problems. Aaron asked Jessica if he could bring Mark home to spend the weekend with them. Of course, she agreed. This began a several-month-long relationship. He didn't spend every weekend, but he did spend many with them. They said he was a very polite house guest, seemed to be really great with kids, etc. He would go to the beach with them, have barbecues with them and some of their other friends. They really liked him, and so did their friends. Aaron's mom, for some reason, had some bad vibes about him, but no one else who met him did. Now, I don't remember how it all came about, but there was a terrible story in the newspaper from the larger city about a murderer. A man had gone into this woman's home and murdered her and her 4 kids. Of course, this woman who was murdered was Mark's ex, and 2 of the children were actually his own kids. He acted devastated, of course. According to Aaron and Jennifer, he spent a few weekends with them afterwards and they comforted him in his loss. He left not long after this happened and went back to wherever he was from, and Aaron and Jennifer didn't hear from him or see him ever again. Sometime later, the law enforcement from this area broke the case, and of course, Mark was the one who murdered his ex, and they extradited him back here. The situation was, he murdered his ex-wife because she was trying to have him arrested for not paying child support. He shot her and her 2 oldest children. He then drowned the 2 younger ones that were his kids, both toddler age, in the bathtub. Naturally, my friends were shocked and horrified. They had spent quite a bit of time with this guy and had him staying whole weekends in their home, and he was around their children and turned out to be a cold-blooded murderer who was capable of even murdering his own children. Please note that this next story is one that I had actually narrated a few years ago. However, I want to remake it, so here goes. So, when I was in elementary school, one of the boys a few grades ahead of me was Kyle Doobie. I was 2 or 3 grades below him, so I didn't have much contact with him outside of recess. In the 4-square line, he often made it a point to stand right behind me and yank on my pigtails as hard as he could, whipping them around under the pretense that I was a horse and he was quote-unquote riding me. He also used to bring knives to school and would sometimes threaten some of his classmates with them when they did something to make him angry, and at one point he actually pulled one on a girl after school, out behind the school. Why nothing was officially done about it, I don't know, but my school, being very small, was not known for being on top of the disciplinary side of things. There were a number of small things, the hair pulling and just the general way he acted, that led to me being very uncomfortable whenever he was around. I wasn't alone in this regard. Former classmates have also expressed feeling uneasy in his presence. To my relief, he ended up moving away, and none of us heard anything from or about him for a number of years. One day, he shows up on the local news, having been arrested for the murder of Nicole Cable. He made a fake Facebook profile, lured her out of her house, kidnapped her, duct-taped her, and left her in the back of his dad's pickup truck. His intention was to pretend to find her and be the hero. When he went back and found that she was dead, he dumped her body in the woods and covered it in sticks. They found her a week later. I was in school when I read the article, and I had to go to the nurse's office because I felt so weak, sick, and shaky. It's very disconcerting to think a murderer used to yank on my hair. So I'll try to recount this as accurately as possible, but this happened 16 years ago, and this isn't a story I share often. My friend, call him Mike, and I are at a bar one night with a friend of ours. We're there with our friend Art, older guy, we've known him for a few years from hanging out in clubs and shit. We're in our early 20s, and Art's in his mid-30s or so, but hey, we're all out having fun and trying to pick up chicks, so age isn't an issue with us. Night comes to a close and Art asks us if we want to go to a party with him in Westchester. It's about 30 minutes from where we are, but in the opposite direction of home. There was no guarantee of how big or fun this party would be, so we politely declined and headed to the after-hours spot near our house. Fast forward a couple of days, we read about a girl missing out in the Westchester area. We joke and say, "Thank God we weren't out there," and let the news pass. Fast forward another 2 years, an arrest is made concerning the missing girl. The girl, Amy Willard, she was murdered and her body discovered a few days after she went missing. The story made every headline in the area and, I believe, got some national attention. In fact, the show Forensic Files did an episode about this. The murderer, Arthur Bomer. The same Art that Mike and I were hanging with the night Amy was murdered. Had we gone with him to Westchester, it's possible that we either would be in jail with him, or worse, I wouldn't be here typing this. You see, Art killed a man in Nevada and served 11 years for it. When paroled in 1990, he moved to PA. He was arrested for breaking and entering in 1998, and when apprehended, he was driving the car of a woman named Maria Cabuenos, whose remains were found in March of 1998, and her murder had remained unsolved, and still is to this day. They linked his DNA to the Willard case and convicted. He sits on death row right now, I believe. I lived in Astoria in Ravenswood houses in 1996. I was friends with the mailman who was a really cool guy. His name was Rich. What happened after New Year's was crazy, and for months I saw this man deteriorate into a killer. Rich was an all-round cool guy. He was a good-looking, charismatic mailman who delivered mail around our neighborhoods. His baby's mom lived in my projects in Ravenswood houses. He would say hi to everyone, and on Christmas, no matter how poor people were, they often left him a tip in cash. Everybody liked him. Rich had a dark side to him that involved a fight where he beat his baby's mom and got a restraining order. He broke her orbital bone during an argument. During that year, his girlfriend would often walk around with 2 black eyes or a swollen cheek. He was beating her. He didn't show up for 2 weeks because of some departmental procedure suspending him till they found out what the case was about. I saw him 2 weeks later, and Rich was less cheery. The new year brought him a child support garnishment for his kid, and legal problems, not to mention problems regarding custody. A few months passed, and I had seen him staring into the distance of the hot sun. He did not look good. His long stares would be longer and longer, and it would take his name being called 3 times for him to respond. Everyone heard he had broken the court order and beat his girlfriend again. Rich was not the cheery, charismatic man we saw, but something darker. He stopped saying hello to everyone. One day, coming out of work, I see a Telemundo truck along with an Eyewitness News Channel 7 and NY1 news van. Rich killed his wife, and 7-year-old, and 13-year-old stepson. Both heads were chopped off. The kid's penis was found in their mouths. Both heads were in a closet. They lived 2 buildings down from me, and my friend was their neighbor. Cops sealed off the building. Rich tried to slit his wrist, but failed and was taken by an ambulance. After detectives left the crime scene 2 weeks later and everything was concluded, we then snuck in through my neighbor who lived next door. All the action took place in the kitchen. It was like blood was dragged from the living room to the bedroom. The bedroom had a broken door, and yet we didn't go inside. This was before crime scene cleanup came. I had nightmares for weeks. For a week, the boy who lived in my building, who was 7, was friends with Rich's kids. The kid had become traumatized after he heard about his friend's death. His mother encouraged me to talk to him, since he looked up to me as a big brother. I remember he asked me, "Why do people hurt kids?" I could only say, "Because they're sick in their heads." He sobbed in front of me and I comforted him. From that point on, I had trouble sleeping for a while. Going in the actual murder scene made things a lot worse. I will always remember a blank stare when I joked around with him. It was like he was staring through me.